Good morning, the time is now 10:03. I have minutes and a quorum of the board is present. The pension review board will come to order. Ms. McLaughlin, will you please call roll of the members?
Yes. Stephanie Livy,
Here.
Keith Brainerd, Marcia Dush,
Present.
Christopher Gonzalez,
Here.
Christopher Zook,
Here.
Roy Rodriguez, Daniel Harper.
Present.
At this time, I'll now entertain a motion to excuse Mr. Brainerd and Mr. Rodriguez from today's board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
A motion has been made by Mr. Zook and seconded by Ms. Dush. Any discussion from the board? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and Mr. Brainerd and Mr. Rodriguez, their absences from the July 23rd, 2026 board meeting are excused. Next item on the agenda is consideration and action on minutes for the February 25th, 2026 board meeting. Members have received the minutes of the last meeting. Are there any corrections to the minutes as circulated? Hearing none at this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as circulated.
So moved.
Second.
Been made by Ms. Dush, seconded by Mr. Gonzalez. Is there any discussion from the board? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, the minutes are approved as circulated. Next item on today's agenda is an opportunity for any board members to provide any opening remarks. So at this time, I'll open it to the board. If anyone has anything they'd like to say prior to us getting into the substance of today's agenda. Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to public comment. We'll now accept public comments. All public comments are limited to 3 minutes. Is there anyone in the audience, in person or virtually, that would like to make any comments or? Hearing none, public comment is closed. Next, we'll move on to actuarial committee. Since Mr. Brainerd is absent today, I will ask Ms. Dush to introduce item 6.
I will now call on David Fee, Chief Actuary, to present item 6A.
David Fee, the staff actuary, here to present item 6A, the actuarial evaluation report and episode view report. So today we'll go over changes since the February board meeting. That includes system news with some major updates for Nacogdoches, major assumption changes for 6 systems, funding progress, including updates for 33 new evaluation reports received since February, and a chart showing overall progress over the last 6 years. We'll review key metrics by system type, a list of system outlier statistics, such as the longest funding periods, an update on the self-sponsor contribution considerations letter that we sent in March, and an update on some assumption discussions and how actual equivalence is becoming a trending topic in tests. For the FSRP report, we'll go over status changes since the February board meeting and a full list of systems for each risk category. For Texas Public Pension System news, the Arlington plan that was for temporary employees and seasonal employees has terminated. The city of Conroe, though not a done deal, has proposed a budget that includes sponsor contribution increases for Conroe Fire. Conroe Fire was one of the only, if not the only telco sponsor that was contributing less to their telco system than they were to TMRS, but they are proposing to at least match that in 2027. Dallas Police and Fire is now FSRP compliant, Galveston employees increased their $5 cap from 75,000 to 100,000. Nacogdoches County Hospital District now has operations been assumed by Tenet Healthcare. And we're hopeful that that will alleviate some of their budget constraints. And probably more importantly, they have assured us that they have a specific budget item, a line item in 2027 for the pension funding. And then lastly, the Woodlands Fire reduced their vesting requirement from 20 years down to 10 years. There's significant economic assumption changes. We had Atlanta Fire reduce their discount rate by 25 basis points. Galveston Fire from 7.5 to 7.45. Harlingen Fire reduced from 7.75 down to 7.5. If you remember, they were one of 3 remaining systems that were over 7.5% expected return. So that leaves us with 2 remaining, and that's Orange Fire and San Diego. And San Benito Fire reduced from 7.5 down to 7. For payload growth rate, both Dallas Basin Fire and supplemental plan increased by 100 basis points. That's likely due to the Prop U that passed in Dallas that had police staffing, salary, and pension funding provisions. So over the next several slides, we'll go over the 33 evaluation reports received since February, and they're organized by category. So the first category is systems that are now 30 years and under, so they're not going to meet the FSRP threshold. That includes Dallas Police and Fire, Harlingen Fire, Nacogdoches Memorial Hospital, and Wichita Falls Fire. We also have systems that have reached our 2040 target and our funding guidelines of 15-year funding periods and under. That includes Dallas Police and Fire Supplemental, El Paso Employees, Galveston Wars, and San Benito Fire. We also have 3 new systems that are newly reporting to the PRB. And all 3 are in pretty good shape in terms of their funding period. The highest is North Texas Municipal Water District at 19, and the lowest is San Jacinto River Authority, which is overfunded. These systems all have ADCs with closed amortization periods. So for these systems, we see the funding period decrease by exactly 1 if they do annual evaluations, or exactly 2 if they do biennial evaluations. These systems have ADCs as well, but the funding period will remain in a predictable range and not necessarily decrease by exactly 1 or exactly 2 like on the previous slide. So these are slightly more complicated, usually with layers. So you might have a system, say it has 15-year layers, so maybe the 2025 loss is amortized over 15 years, and a 2024 gain is amortized over 14 years, and a 2023 losses amortized over 13 years, etc. So it's usually going to stay under the largest loss amortization period, but it's hard to predict exactly what the funding period will be.
Mr. Fee, David, just a comment on that. It's so nice to see that the funded ratios on both the plans on this page and on the prior page are at least stable or improving. I think there's only one that had a very minor decrease, Port of Houston. But otherwise, we're seeing continued improvement in funded status.
Yes, and the layered approach is perfectly reasonable, and we expect a lot of systems to move in that direction. And these are the remaining systems. They do not have ADCs in place, so they have the most unpredictable movements in funding periods. That includes Abilene Fire, Atlanta Fire, Galveston Employees, Galveston Fire, JPS Tarrant County Hospital, and the Woodlands Fire. So here we show the funding progress over the last 6 years. If you look at the bottom bar, that has doubled from just over 20 in 2020 to 44 systems under a 15-year funding period as of today. So that means almost half of our systems have already reached our 2040 target of a 15-year funding period. And if we look at the top bars, We had 35 systems that were over a 30-year funding period in 2020, and we're down to just 10 systems today. But as we'll see in a few slides, it's really down to 3. This is a funding map of every system that has a funding period of 30 years or less, and the systems will move up and to the left as their funding status improves. And the hope is that by 2040, all of our systems will be in the upper left-hand quadrant. This shows systems with funding periods over 30 years based on the last valuation report received. We did have 2 drop-offs in February. That was San Benito Fire and Harlingen Fire. But we have seen many improvements since the last valuation report. And so when we look on the next slide, we have 3 systems remaining that have not made any changes to their contributions and benefits. That's TRS, San Angelo Fire, and Plainview Fire. This is the system overview by type. You can see that the funding period has decreased for statewide and municipal since February, and the funded ratios increased for all but 810 systems. The median expected return is unchanged since February, and we have 2 Telford systems that are remaining above that 7.5% expected return. That's San Angelo Fire and Orange Fire. We do have a lot of good news. We can say now that most Telford municipal systems have funding periods between 15 years and 30 years. And we have 8 Telford and 7 municipal systems with funding periods below 15 years. We also have 14 Telford and 9 municipal systems that are at or below a 7% expected return.
This is really worth celebrating, I would think. I do think that this is a sign of tremendous progress. Thank you.
And now we'll look at a 6-year trend. And so you see substantial progress in the funding period, which is improved double what we would have expected. We would have expected the funding periods to decrease by about 6 years. But we see 12.6 for municipal, 13 for Telfra, and 16.7 for statewide. We have a lot of good news. 27 Telfra systems decreased their expected returns by 25 basis points or more. And most Telfra municipal systems decreased their funding periods by 10 years or more. So we do have some systems that aren't necessarily going in the same direction. We had 10 systems that had both a funded ratio decrease and a funding period increase. But 4 of those completed FSRPs, 4 even with those movements still remained over 80% funded. And of the other 2, 1 is at risk. Then we have 14 systems, including those 10 that increased funding periods. 5 of them are Telfra, 2 are municipal, 4 are 810, and 3 are statewide.
And David, just to comment that reducing, when you say we've got great news, 27 Telfra systems decrease their expected returns by 25 basis points. That's good news because we believe they're taking a more realistic approach to funding the plan, or at least looking at the funded status of the plan. It's not great news that they don't expect to earn more in their assets, but we think it's great news that they're taking a better realistic approach to funding the plan.
Yes, the lower their expected return, the more likely it is that they're going to exceed their expected return and not be under. So these are systems with funding periods greater than 40 years. The number of systems on this slide has been dwindling for a couple of years now. So in December of 2024, I showed you 11 systems on this slide, and it's decreased every single board meeting to where we're now down to 2. And if you look at the notes, we can easily expect to be down to 0 at some point. We have 6 systems that are below 65% funding ratio and a funding period above 30 years. The top 4 have notes, but the bottom 2, San Angelo Fire and Plainview Fire, have not made changes that we'd expect to show up in the next valuation report. But we know that there have been very productive discussions between San Angelo, the city, and San Angelo Fire. And Plainview Fire is our last remaining legacy of SRP. So this is an update on the Telford sponsor contribution consideration. We sent a March letter for your direction to city managers and finance managers. Telford sponsors who general employees are covered under TMRS and they were not contributing to an ADC. The purpose was to encourage consideration of changes in how they determine contribution rates going forward. And we made 4 main points. Firefighter pension costs more than general employee pensions because firefighters have much higher retention rates. The TMRS contribution rate comparison that many of these cities do is not going to work for a whole lot longer because once TMRS is fully funded, there will be no unfunded liability to amortize, and so it won't be a fair comparison. We also encourage Social Security contributions to be considered, especially if firefighters do not participate in Social Security, but the TMRS numbers do participate. And we also encourage them to consider an ADC. We had a very positive response. We had good discussions with the cities of Conroe, Port Arthur, and San Angelo. And we had positive written responses where the city of Plainview said they'll take a closer look to identify best practices. City of Texarkana pointed out they've already taken steps. City of Tyler is aware of the issue and they're working with the firefighter board. And the city of Wichita Falls agree that Telford contributions and TMRS contributions should no longer be linked. This is an update on actual equivalence assumptions. We've been focused here on the PRB and our guidance on lump sums because lump sums are the form that is by far most affected by actual equivalence. But actual equivalence affects all optional forms and also sometimes early retirement adjustments. And so it's these other optional forms and early retirement adjustments where we've been seeing a lot of movement, and we're happy to see it. So there's been talk at recent Telford conferences about updating actual equivalence assumptions. Galveston employees has updated their actual equivalence assumptions. Galveston Fire, the actuary is recommending they update their early retirement provisions to update the actual equivalence. And Woodlands Fire, their actuary is recommending that they consider updating their actual equivalence. And as a side note, AT&T just settled a large lawsuit due to their outdated mortality assumptions and their actual equivalence. So now we have SRP updates. We had 3 status changes. We removed Dallas Police and Fire, Arlington Fire, and San Benito Fire from the lists. And in almost 5 years working with the PRB, this is the first time I can say that we have no systems currently subject to FSRPs. And my notes say to pause for thunderous applause.
Yeah.
Amen. Well, way to go.
And these are 2 remaining systems at risk. San Angelo Fire. We know they've had good conversations between the system and sponsor recently. And Texarkana Fire, the system and sponsor have an agreement, and so they should come off this list once we receive the next evaluation report. And then lastly, we have 1 remaining legacy FSRP, and that's Plainview Fire. And it is certainly possible that just due to positive return, like we've been seeing with other systems, they could come off the list of their next evaluation. That concludes my remarks.
Are there any questions or discussion from the board? If none, thank you, Mr. Fee. And I will call on tomorrow, Pamela Bernstein, General Counsel, to join you in presenting item 6B through 6D. And we will take up the motions in item 6B through D after the presentation concludes.
All right, good morning, Chair and members. Tamara Ehrenstein, General Counsel, presenting with David Fee on FSRP rule revisions and statutory recommendations. First, an overview of our presentation today. I'll provide an update on where we are in the rule review, rulemaking and statutory review process, including providing some information on stakeholder comments that we've received. David will provide some information on the proposed rules, including draft guidance documents, as well as the draft statutory recommendations. In your packet, you'll find the notice of adopted rule review, proposed rules, draft statutory recommendations, and the draft guidance documents that we'll be walking through in that order. We welcome any feedback, discussion, and questions from the board at any time. We do have the 2 action items that we will hold until after the presentation, and I'll help walk the board through your consideration of those items. First, an update on the rulemaking process and timeline. We've seen a similar slide at previous board and actuarial committee meetings this year. We have been working on this project since January. We sent the initial concepts and draft rules that were presented to the actuarial committee in January and the board in February out for informal stakeholder comment. We also had a formal 30-day comment period for the rule review, which was published after the February board meeting. Today, the bolded date, we're presenting the proposed rules for the board's consideration. Should the board approve publication of the proposed rules, that would trigger an additional 30-day formal comment period, and adoption of the rules would then be considered at the September board meeting. I want to note here that we do have the draft statutory recommendations for the board's consideration and discussion as well. But we do recommend that the board hold on any action on those recommendations until the September meeting, just to align the action on the final action on the proposed rules and on the statutory recommendations at that time. And then after the September meeting, the last few months of the year would be implementation and outreach on any rule changes, and we would include any legislative recommendations in the biennial report. Next, stakeholder engagement. So as I mentioned, we sent out the preliminary rule and statutory concepts to all agency stakeholders in March, and then we sent out the draft proposed rules that went before the actual meeting in April. The following month, we received 4 comments from the March call for informal stakeholder feedback, and we did not receive any formal comments on the rule review. So I'll provide a high-level overview here, and then Mr. P will mention relevant comments in a bit more detail as he walks the board through the proposed rules. One commenter supported several of the recommendations. Another supported the agency developing guidelines or standardized form for FSRP updates, as well as requiring involvement in updates by the plan sponsor, and suggested including a model timeline or example for the FSRP process. David will touch on those recommendations a bit more. One commenter noted that statutory changes may not be necessary given the small number of systems triggering the FSRP requirement. And finally, one commenter suggested that the PRB develop transparency and independence requirements for reviews by investment advisors. Overall, these comments supported several of the draft changes and none opposed any of the changes, which suggests the changes in the proposed rules are acceptable to stakeholders. So now I'll turn it over to Mr.
So now I'll go over the draft guidance materials and rule changes. Now, so we have 7 categories of changes being considered. Disclosure of inadequate funding arrangements, which are already a requirement but have not been monitored for compliance. So we've developed a sample notice, and also in Texas Administrative Code 610.15, we now require systems to send a copy of their notice to the Pension Review Board. For progress updates, we're to have consistent compliance, but inconsistent formats. We've developed a new form, and chapter 610.31 would now require that new form to be used. We also have clarification of FSRP due dates and timelines for submitting FSRPs in a post-2025 world. And so chapter 610.30 now clarifies that 2-year deadline. We remove outdated text in 610.31. We add more precise order language in 610.20 and 610.32. We clarify certain sections applied only before September 1st, 2025 for voluntary and legacy FSRPs. That's in 610.14, 610.20, and 610.32. And then we have minor technical corrections in 610.20 and 610.21. So now we'll go over the new model notice and the new progress update form. For the new model notice, it's modeled after the PBGC annual funding notice. But while the annual funding notice is 9 pages long and gets distributed to members of all corporate pension systems regardless of their fund status, ours is just over 1 page long and it's intended for underfunded systems only that have funding periods greater than 30 years. It includes information from the last 3 valuation dates. That includes the valuation date, the assets and liability, the funded percentage, and the funding period. We then include definitions of each of these 5 key terms, a link to the PRB data center, and contact information for the system administrator. Then when a system triggers an FSRP and we send them a letter, we'll now include a link to the new model notice in that letter. The new progress update form, it will include a summary of any recent discussions between the system and sponsor, the dates and expected topics of any upcoming scheduled discussions between those two, signatures of both the system and sponsor representatives, and while this form could be voluntary or mandatory, for now we've included language of 67.31 that would make it mandatory. When we send a letter to systems that they're triggering an FSRP, we'll include a link to that new progress update form as well. This recommendation will provide more guidance on progress updates, which is support to stakeholders. One also suggests including a model timeline. That model timeline will go over in a few agenda items because we developed a paper going over what that model timeline will look like. Regarding former plan sponsor involvement, plan sponsor involvement is already required, but we believe the new form, especially requiring signatures from both the system and the sponsor, makes that more obvious. Now I'll go over proposed rule language and text administrative code chapter 16.
David, at this point, let me just ask the, my other board members here, if there's any, discussion or thoughts about the proposed, form. Either the, progress update or the, model notice for inadequate funding. We have, I believe, reviewed these in the past, both at the actuarial, committee meeting and I believe here at the board. And so I know we have made, comments and changes at that point, but is there anything further at this point from the board on these 2 documents?
None for me.
No.
Okay, then David, please continue.
So chapter 16.14 now has language to reflect that voluntary FSRPs were applicable before September 2025 only. Chapter 16.15 now has a requirement system to provide a copy of their communications to the PRB within 30 days of sending to members so that we can ensure compliance with the requirement to require disclosure of inadequate funding standards. 16.20 now has more precise language regarding corridors. So the previous language was the system will be considered compliant if plan experience exceeds the corridor in a favorable way. We now better define what favorable way means. The new language is a system will be considered compliant if the funded ratio exceeds the minimum threshold or funding period falls below the maximum threshold. We also have 2 minor technical corrections. We have 1 minor technical correction in 16.21. And in 16.30, we point out that systems don't have to wait until 2 years after the valuation date to submit their FSRP. They can submit it any day during that 2-year window. 16.31 specifies systems and government entities must submit progress updates as required by statute, and specifies that the progress updates must now be submitted using the form we just created. It strikes outdated references to voluntary FSRPs and FSRPs triggered evaluations prior to 2021. This recommendation receives support from 1 stakeholder. 16.32 updates the same corridor language that we just went over in 16.20 and also modifies the language to reflect that voluntary FSRPs were previously authorized prior to September 1st, 2025. So that concludes the recommendations for Texas Administrative Code changes. So now we'll look at Texas Government Code.
is there any discussion from the board on the items that we just discussed before we go on to the statutory recommendations? Again, I don't believe this is the first time we're seeing it, and I think that we have already made comments and I think they're reflective. Thank you. Please go ahead.
So one major issue we wanted to address is that many municipal systems require legislation to make benefit and contribution changes. And it then becomes redundant once that legislation is passed to then require city council approval and system board approval, but that is currently required by statute. So both recommendation 1 on this slide and recommendation 1A on the next slide address that issue. The recommendation 1 on this slide is more broad. So while it does address specifically the issue of legislation having been passed, it would also be more broad and give the PRB more authority to handle other situations. As an example, if a statute requires voter approval, then the election results from that vote could suffice for documentation. Recommendation 1A is very specific. It says it would eliminate an additional redundant step for the system sponsors to take formal action in open meetings to adopt FSLPs if they already have a new statute in place. And so the staff recommends recommendation 1A, and that'll be free to vote on in September.
So there is no action item on this at this point in time. We're just informed that there are 2 options here and we'll vote on that in September.
Correct, but if there's any discussion or comments from the board, that would be helpful, certainly if there's any revisions that you all want to see to these recommendations or additional recommendations in advance.
Is there any discussion on this particular recommendation at this point in time?
Seem to make sense to me.
Okay. Hearing nothing, let's go on to number 2.
Recommendation 2, we can create 2 new FSLP reports, a compliance report and a progress report, and we'll discuss each of these on the next slide. So the compliance report would be a biennial report that would go to the governor, the lieutenant governor, and speaker of the house, and also the appropriate standing committees. And it would be submitted at the same time as our normal biennial report, and it would be to highlight non-compliance issues. We'd also have a progress report that would be similar to the current FSLP report we present to you, and that would go to the standing committees just to keep them aware.
Any discussion on these legislative recommendations? I think again.
All right,
Sorry.
so if there's no further discussion or any questions from the board, I can help walk you through the action items before the board today. So first, item 6B, adoption of the rule review, so I'll hand it over to you, Ms. Desch.
So I will entertain a motion to adopt the rule review of 40 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 610.
So moved.
So moved.
I'll second. I'll second.
Okay, the motion was made by
Mr. Zook.
Christopher Zook and seconded by Ms. Levy. Is there any discussion from the board? Okay, so there is a motion to adopt the rule review of 40 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 610. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it, and the rule review is adopted.
All right, and then next, item 6C, this is the proposed rulemaking with changes to the FSRP rules. Ms. Desch, I'll hand it back over to you.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to approve the publication in the Texas Register of the proposed amendments to 40 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 610 as presented, pertaining to the funding soundness restoration plan.
So moved.
Second.
All right, again, motion, it's made by Mr. Zook, seconded by Ms. Levy. Is there any discussion from the board? Okay. Hearing none, a motion has been made to approve the publication in the Texas Register of the proposed amendments to 40 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 610, as presented, pertaining to funding soundness restoration plans. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. And the motion is approved.
Okay, and then finally, item 60, as mentioned earlier, we recommend the board hold on action on legislative recommendations. We'll take those up in September.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Aaronstein and Mr. Fee. I will now call on Brian Burnham, Analytical Services Team Lead and Health Specialist, to present item 6E.
So good morning, members. I'm Brian Burnham, the PRB Analytical Services Team Lead and Telfer Specialist, and I'm going to preview our latest study that we are currently drafting regarding timelines for submitting FSRPs. So FSRPs have been a major topic area of recent policies and studies for the agency. In October 2022, the board adopted the policy for promoting compliance with FSRP requirements. And in September of 2024, we published an intensive study on FSRP overview, implementation, and case studies. Also, as heard from the previous item discussion, we are currently undergoing FSRP rule and statutory review. And these items have tended to focus on what triggers the FSRP requirement and the changes the systems adopt to satisfy that requirement. Now, this latest study aims to highlight what to expect in between the FSRP being triggered and the changes the system and sponsor implement to satisfy the requirement, focusing on what steps generally need to be taken to come to those solutions and how long a system should expect each step to take so that they can ensure they are submitting their FSRP within the established deadline. The FSRP requirement has gone through 3 distinct phases since its implementation. When the requirement was first enacted in 2016, systems had 6 months to complete their FSRP and needed to target a 40-year funding period within 10 years of the triggering valuation. The changes that these systems adopted tended to be smaller relative to the changes that we've seen since 2021 revisions to the requirement, and most did not have ended satisfying the requirement, and the systems had to adopt revised plans. The changes to the FSRP requirement in 2021 gave systems until September 1st, 2025 to adopt a plan that would target a 30-year funding period rather than that initial 40 years. These FSRPs tended to include more substantial changes and often required lengthy negotiations between the system and their sponsoring entities. Now, the third phase began with September 1st, 2025, and systems now have 2 years after the triggering valuation date to finalize a plan. The study uses observations from the systems that adopted a plan during phase 2 to identify the steps that went into completing their FSRP and the length of time devoted to each step. The study then aims to identify what would be considered a reasonable or ideal timeline for each of the expected steps to complete the FSRP in the 2 years allotted to the systems. So we are looking at 5 different FSRPs that were submitted during that second phase. In addition to the information that we have from the systems, as well as our discussions with the systems that took place during the process for completing the FSRP, we intend to interview each system to provide more detail and clarity on what the process was like for coming to the decisions that they eventually adopted. And lastly, for a timeline, we began our initial planning and research for the study back in May. And after this meeting, we'll interview or seek comments from the 5 systems that we highlight in the study to ensure the clear and detailed picture of the timeline. And the final draft of the report is expected to be presented to the full board at our September meeting and then published shortly thereafter.
Thank you. If I could just make a comment here. You know, again, we appear to be in very good stead with respect to FSRPs with, very few left, 1 legacy, now, only a couple at risk. and nobody out of date for an FSRP. But I'm concerned that, if we have one or two bad investment years, we could very easily be back into a situation where plans have to consider an FSRP. And so, I think the study will be really important for anybody who ends up having to, once again, look at preparing an FSRP. And it could easily come back around.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or discussion from the board? So, Mr. Burnham, will you go on to present item 6F?
So item 6F is our report on reporting compliance. For an overview currently of Texas Public Retirement Systems, we currently oversee 101 defined benefit plans. Now, instead of the original 100 we've been reporting on for the past number of years. They have over $400 billion in net assets and over 3.5 million total members, with 1.5 million being active contributing members and just shy of 1 million of them being annuitants being paid benefits. Since my last report to the board, the University Park Firemen's Relief and Retirement Fund has submitted all the reports and has come off this list. So the only remaining system on the non-compliant list is the Nacogdoches County Hospital District Retirement Plan, but it's for both fiscal years 2024 and 2025. So they have submitted their investment report and their membership report, but they have been unable to complete their annual financial report, which is why they are still on this list. Recent discussions with the systems have indicated that the system currently has not been able to engage an auditor to complete these reports. So we do not have a firm date on when these might be done, and as of right now, it doesn't seem like they're being worked on.
Will this change perhaps with the new ownership of the hospital?
That's the hope and the goal, is that things will turn around for them to be able to go. I remember from past discussions with them, back when they completed the 2023 audit, they gave that to us back in January of 2025. Their goal was to have the same auditor then begin the process immediately for 2024 and 2025. That obviously didn't happen the way that they had envisioned. They ran into issues, it seems, and they're now still looking for a new auditor to start working on these. And so for the list of non-annual reporting requirements, it remains unchanged from our previous board meeting. The Laredo Firefighters Retirement System is due for an actuarial audit, which requires the city of Laredo to hire an independent actuary to audit the actuarial reports published by the systems actuary. Our latest information from the city is that they did hire an actuary to complete the work, but we do not have a timeline as right now for when the audit is expected to be completed. And then on this last slide, I just want to highlight the reporting deadline for the December 31st fiscal year end retirement systems. This fiscal year end date is the end date for 70 of our 101 systems, and their deadline is next Wednesday. So some systems have already submitted their reports, but we still have quite a few outstanding. So we expect a very large volume of reports to be submitted to us over the coming days. And if there are no questions, that concludes my report on reporting compliance.
I have one further question on Nacogdoches. Does Tenant become the plan sponsor of the pension plan?
So the plan sponsor would still technically remain as like the retirement committee or the members that vote on that thing. They're the ones who are basically responsible for the benefit changes and the decision making and for the system. And so what Tenant's role is, I'm not 100% sure how they would be involved with the retirement board itself. But if they're the decision makers, then based off of the definitions of the statute, they were the ones that are considered sponsoring entities.
Is there anything that this group can do to find out whether there is appropriate next steps happening? Can we do any sort of referral to their representatives or? Is it just, or is it just informational for us?
I mean, we talk to them from time to time to get updates on what's going on, and they do have a lot of financial stressors. That they're dealing with, and we did speak with them a couple of months ago, I think. So really, I think it's just a matter of reaching out to them periodically for updates.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions or discussions from the board? Hearing none, Mr. Burnham, will you go on to present item 6G?
So I'd like to present to you an update to the non-compliance policy. And in your packet, there are copies of our current policy, our updated policy, and then a red line version showing you the changes between the two. Then the policy was originally adopted in 1996, and it was only updated a handful of times before we last updated it in October 2013, following the changes to our sunset legislation. The policy focuses on the steps the agency takes regarding compliance with section 801-209 of the Texas Government Code, specifically maintaining a list of systems non-compliant with reporting requirements for 60 or more days and notifying the sponsoring entity of those retirement systems about their non-compliance. The current version of the policy only applies to annual financial reporting, which includes the audited financial report, the report on the membership as of the end of their fiscal year, and the investment returns and assumptions report, which is our Form PRB 1000. This is because these three reports have a set deadline and statute of 210 days after the end of the system's fiscal year, while other reports have deadlines that are more variable, such as our investment policies, summary plan descriptions, and amendments, which have due dates of within a specific amount of days after they're amended. So there are now additional reporting requirements that were implemented after 2013, and staff also has the ability to better track additional reports, such as the actuarial audits and experience studies that I've been presenting at the last few board meetings as well. So we believe we have the ability to expand on the policy. The updates to the policy will not change our current practices, but instead just focus on better aligning the language with what we are currently doing. Our proposed changes to the policy would include all required reporting, including the MET forms, PRB 150 and PRB 2000. The FSRP requirements are currently excluded in the proposed changes, as the board adopted a separate compliance policy for FSRP in 2022. The proposed changes aim to better line up the policy with current practices, specifically around our communication with systems prior to them reaching the 60-day non-compliant threshold. Currently, we provide systems with a reminder of upcoming reporting deadlines roughly 60 days and 15 days before the reports are due. We also provide systems with late notices 15 and 45 days after their due dates if we have not received the reports. If the system remains non-compliant for 60 days, we notify the sponsoring entity of the retirement system, usually the city council or district board of managers, via a letter signed by our executive director, and CC the system on that correspondence. The policy also specifies that staff will provide the full board with an update on compliance at each board meeting, which of course we already do, and I just did in the last item. But we are just adjusting the language to better reflect what is currently presented in those meetings. And so we began working on the proposed changes back in February and throughout March. This update was discussed at our April actuarial committee meeting, and we made one update to the policy based on the feedback, which was the listing of all the reports in item 3. We then sent the updated policy to stakeholders in May, but we received no feedback. The draft can be adopted today if there are no desired changes from the board. And so that concludes my presentation on it, and I leave it to the board.
Are there any questions or discussions from the board on this matter? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adopt the changes to the policy for regulation of non-compliant retirement systems, now titled the Policy for Promoting Compliance with Required Reporting.
I'll move.
Second.
All right, the motion was made by Daniel Harper and seconded by Mr. Zook, was that? Thank you. All in favor, I have had a motion to adopt the changes to the policy for the regulation of non-compliant retirement systems, now titled the Policy for Promoting Compliance with Required Reporting. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And all opposed, say nay. The ayes have it, and the amendments are adopted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, this concludes the actuarial committee business.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I just kind of wanna pull the board. I think we were anticipating that today's meeting would move a little bit slower than what it had, but we had planned to take a break at this time. If anyone needs that break, I'm happy to take it, or if the board's happy with proceeding on, I'm happy to proceed forward as well.
I'm good with keep
Okay.
going.
Perfect.
Let's roll.
Awesome. Okay, so we will move on to agenda item number 7, which is the education committee. And so I will turn this over again to Ms. Desch to walk us through this agenda item.
Okay, thank you. At the, education committee meeting that was a couple of months ago, it was a very lively discussion of the matters that we will be, discussing today. And I just want to say the focus that we will be looking at 2 things. The staff has worked very diligently on, ways to improve the reporting, of compliance with MET rules. And yet, you know, we do have concerns about the actual trustees and administrators complying with the rules. So they're kind of 2 very separate topics that we will be looking at today. And so I would now like to call on Ms. Jasmine Loomis, Education and Communication Specialist, to present item 7A.
Good morning, board members. My name is Jasmine Loomis, and I am the PRB's Education and Communication Specialist. Today, I'll be presenting updates on the MET Program Compliance Improvement Project. First, I'm going to start with a little bit of background on the project. PRB staff presented the first annual MET compliance report during the December 2025 board meeting, where the board directed staff to research potential statutory recommendations and agency actions to improve trustee compliance with MET program requirements. After the December meeting, staff began brainstorming potential ideas for statutory and non-statutory changes to present to stakeholders for initial reactions during a virtual feedback session on April 9th. Following the virtual feedback session, staff composed stakeholder feedback and presented it alongside the proposed ideas to the Education Committee during the May 20th meeting for discussion. Throughout the improvement project timeline, there have been some additional developments and updates that staff hope will also help in improving MET compliance outside of the options I will present today. I'm happy to say that we have seen an improvement in reporting compliance with the MET program. Systems are required to submit 2 forms annually by April 1st, including the PRB 150 form, which is used to update the PRB on board changes, and the PRB 2000 form, which is used to report training completed by trustees to the agency. Only 4 systems were sent non-compliance letters for missing the reporting deadline by more than 60 days and added to the list of non-compliant systems on the PRB website, and 2 systems have already come off this list. Staff has plans and has started expanding our relationship with existing and potential new training providers to increase courses approved for MET credit. We believe increasing the number of courses approved for MET credit will give trustees new opportunities to get their required credit hours. Staff will be presenting on trustee compliance with the MET requirements at the December 2026 board meeting for the annual MET compliance report. Here we will see the effects of these changes and continue to see how NET rule changes approved in 2024 have impacted compliance numbers. One of the biggest updates we have made outside of this project is launching the new updates to the pension online reporting tool and internal database earlier this month. The updates included some major improvements aimed at increasing compliance with the training requirements, including displaying trustee and administrator compliance, allowing system administrators to report training and new or outgoing trustees directly in the portal, and giving PRB staff the ability to give corrections to reports through the portal. I will be showing you all of these updates here in a moment, but initial feedback from systems has been very positive. Staff have increased communications with system administrators since the launch, which staff anticipated. The communication has primarily included needing to update PRB records on trustees serving on the board and questions about trustees' compliance status. This launch has been impactful in updating our records on active trustees and trustee training. And as staff have learned over the years in other projects, outdated NET records do negatively impact trustee compliance numbers. With administrators now able to see this information so easily, we are able to keep NET records more up to date than ever and hopefully make positive impact on compliance numbers. I'm going to start a quick overview of the updates to the portal. So here's what the new dashboard looks like. This is the first page administrators will see when they log into the portal. The left blue box is where administrators can go to submit most PRB reports, such as financial reports or PDF versions of the NET reports. The right box is where all of the new updates for the NET program are housed. So if administrators click the NET reports dashboard, it will take them to this page. This is the new NET dashboard. There is a lot of quick key information on this page that will draw administrators' attention to different factors that may be impacting their system's compliance with reporting and training requirements. Displayed in the leftmost square are any trustees currently non-compliant with the training requirements. This information used to only be available to administrators if they requested an NET compliance report from staff, or if staff did NET compliance report to the board. In the middle square is where administrators can see if the PRB sent them any correction requests for a report they submitted. Reports listed here need to be fixed and resubmitted to the agency to be accepted. Previously, the PRB would email systems about needed corrections, then systems would have to upload a new form for staff to review. This new feature streamlines that process and ensures administrators see when a report needs to be fixed to be accepted. In the right box are all the reports that are in progress and have not yet been submitted to the PRB for review. Any reports listed in this box are not visible to staff. Above this information, there is a Manage Contacts tab that shows administrators their trustee information according to our records, and another tab labeled View All Reports, where administrators can look at all the NET reports they have created and submitted. So we click the Manage Contacts tab, it'll lead us to this page. This is the Manage Contacts page, and it holds a lot of information about trustees. Starting on the left side of the page, there is a box that lists every active contact according to PRB records. Below this box is a box labeled Inactive Trustees. This is where information for trustees no longer serving on the board are moved to. The PRB keeps inactive trustee information for record keeping purposes, so contact names will remain here. This feature should be really useful for administrators to see whether PRB records are up to date, especially if the system has a new or outgoing trustee. Administrators are able to see that those updates need to be submitted to us. As I mentioned earlier, outdated trustee records have been known to negatively impact trustee compliance numbers, so staff hope that these updates will continue to improve our record keeping and compliance. Clicking on a trustee will make this middle box appear. This box includes all of the trustees' contact information and allows administrators to submit edits to their information, like a new email or a change in their board position. Administrators can also deactivate a trustee if they leave the board, and also add a new trustee as well. All of this information was usually submitted to the PRB to the PRB through the PRB 150 form, which is due within 30 days of a change to the board and annually by April 1st. So this feature can now be used instead of that form. Next to the info tab for the trustee is a training cycle tab. Clicking this tab allows administrators to see a trustee's compliance status with each of their MET cycles. The compliance status is color coded, so a compliance cycle is green, an in progress cycle is gray, and a not compliant cycle is red. So this is some new information for our systems. Previously, like I said earlier, administrators had to request a compliance report from the PRB, which staff would create manually to send the systems. It was a lengthy process that not a lot of systems utilized. Now the information is easily available at any time. Staff hope making this information more readily available to administrators will make them more aware of their trustees' compliance status and what cycles need training. This in turn should increase compliance with the training requirements.
Isn't there also an administrative compliance?
Yes, and their contact information is also included on the screen.
Okay, great.
Moving to the View All Reports tab, administrators can see all of the MET reports they have created and those that they've submitted to the PRB. These are also color coded, so reports that have been submitted will appear blue. And if they have been approved, they will appear green, and red if they've been rejected. If the report needs fixes, it will appear yellow, and they can actually click on the report and see what our comments are. Gray in progress reports have not been submitted to the PRB yet. This feature should streamline the report review process for both systems and staff, as administrators now have a log of what training was approved or rejected by the PRB for their trustees. Having more accurate information on review reports helps keep track of what training was or wasn't accepted, and whether the administrator needs to submit new training to the PRB. So above this information is a blue Create New Report tab. From here, administrators can report training to the PRB. This information used to be reported on a PDF form of the PRB 2000, but can now be submitted here. On this first page, administrators input course information like the course title, the date, credit hours, and from there, they can click Save and Next to get to this page. Here, administrators can add one or more attendees to the course. So multiple trustees attended a conference and attended the same sessions. Administrators can report the session all at one time. Previously on the PDF form, administrators would have to type the session information repeatedly for each trustee that attended it. But here, they just assign the attendees to the session. Staff will mention this in an upcoming presentation, but we have received feedback from systems on a few occasions about the difficulty of using the PRB 2000 PDF to submit training, and staff hope that these updates streamline that process and make it a little bit easier for administrators. Once an administrator is done adding attendees, they can click Next, which will lead them to the final page. Here, administrators just review the information that they inputted, confirm that it's correct, and then submit it to us for us to review. That was my overview of the portal updates, and I'm happy to answer any questions before I move back to the main project.
Is this in operation?
Yes.
Has this been released?
Yeah, we launched it earlier this month, so we've had some hands-on experience with it already.
Any questions from the board on this?
Just a comment from me, very good work. It looks like a really nice, easy to use website from what I can tell, and the presentation.
Great. All right, so with all of these changes, we're hoping that, and you've already started to see that there is improved compliance with the MET requirements. Why don't you go on now and talk about the suggestions for compliance improvement?
Yeah, so following our education committee meeting in May, the PRB sent out a document summarizing potential statutory and non-statutory changes based on feedback received during the virtual stakeholder meeting and discussion by the education committee. This document was sent out to stakeholders for feedback on June 9th and then again on June 16th. We also included requests for feedback in the PRB weekly news clips and posted it on the PRB website and LinkedIn page. Staff received written comments from 4 retirement systems and 1 phone call. I will now begin presenting the options PRB staff and the education committee have come up with to help improve trustee compliance with the MET program. There is a document after this presentation in your packet summarizing the proposed recommendations and stakeholder feedback. And you also have a copy of the written comments staff received from stakeholders in your binder. Options labeled as new were not initially presented to stakeholders during the virtual feedback session and were added to the document after the education committee meeting. There are also a few options separated into A and B. These options are mutually exclusive and only one option could be adopted by the board. Please feel free to ask any questions or provide comments throughout my presentation. I'll also provide an opportunity for comments at the end.
Ms. Loomis, at this point, let me just comment about the discussions that we had in our main meeting, which is that the committee feels very strongly that if you are going to be a trustee or an administrator of a pension plan, and you are responsible for managing the benefits and money that is taken out of a member's paycheck, 10, 12, 15% of pay often going into these plans. And similar amounts, of payroll coming from taxpayers. That if you agree to be a trustee, then you should take that responsibility extremely seriously and make sure that you are educated in order to make appropriate decisions with respect to managing that money and the benefits that are related to retirement from those plans. And so there was very strong feelings that we should have very strong compliance and very low toleration for trustees who choose not to comply with MET. And I do realize that there could be differences between a large system where perhaps the governor appoints somebody as a trustee and, it's a very rapid succession from appointment into serving on a trust. I also recognize that there could be issues with small plans who are having trouble recruiting trustees. I think the committee, and please, I ask my other committee members to comment on this. But with respect to small plans, we have a great concern that just because it's hard to recruit trustees, we should not necessarily make it easier for those trustees to somehow avoid complying with these requirements. And so I think we are really looking for improved compliance. But the issue, I think, today is that you have a lot going on with respect to new reporting. And we could see greatly improved compliance from what we had seen before, just because we weren't getting accurate information before. So the question really becomes, do we need to act with respect to either statutory or perhaps the rules at this point in time until we see the results of the new portal reporting ability? And so I would ask my other committee members, I think, if you want to comment. Chris Gonzalez is on. Chris, I don't know if you want to make a comment before we get started on this.
Yes, thank you. I agree with your comments based on our discussion at the committee meeting in May. I have a question. So do we have any evidence to suggest that prior to the portal being remodeled or revamped, the issue with getting trained was the complexity or sort of the difficulty of not having a portal? So is that the reason trustees delayed or did not get trained?
I think one of the key aspects of the portal that we think is gonna have the most impact on compliance is seeing trustee compliance status and having that so readily available. I think there were some instances where systems weren't aware that training they submitted was not approved, or it was not, all of it was not applied, or something was going on that a trustee was not compliant, and they were not aware for a long period of time. Because they weren't requesting MET compliance reports from the agency. And so making it so easily available and easy to see, hopefully will make systems more aware, and also us being able to tell them when a report isn't accepted for one reason or another. Having that in the portal, they can see that it wasn't accepted, will also give them more insight as to why maybe someone is not compliant when they thought that they should be.
Okay,
So,
fair enough. Yep. So for me, if it's easier and more convenient to be trained, I have the counterintuitive position that then, a deadline would not be unfair to a good trustee. Also, I think, in our discussion in May, I made the point, I think, these are volunteers. They can decline an appointment or choose not to be on a committee or board. And 7 hours of educational training for something as significant and material as the decisions they make around, benefits and investments is not a lot to ask. And my argument was also, I would imagine that as a trustee with the responsibility of governance of these plans, they would want to be trained before they made a decision. So from their perspective, you would think proper training, it should be a requirement before they're comfortable enough to make decisions. So I lean towards being more restrictive, but I'll stop there and hear from others.
so at this point, we're going to review four. I'm sorry, 6 proposed, four proposed. I'm sorry. We're going to review 3 statutory suggestions and 3 non-statutory recommendations. And so the question I think that we have today is to discuss whether or not we want to go forward with the statutory changes, because that would have to be our recommendations would have to be put into our biennial report, correct?
Yes, and the more difficult part would be passing the bill.
Okay,
Because like they would go in the biennial report, but then we would need to get legislation passed.
all right. So we have the opportunity to say we feel strongly that we should move forward with the statutory, or we can say we can keep considering these perhaps for the next legislative session. And then we also can consider just the regulatory changes, the rules changes, non-statutory options that we have, and maybe go forward with those either with or without a recommendation to go forward with the statutory.
I would also add that the non-statutory items, I think there's just one that would require a rule change. And one of them is about making it transparent which trustees are not compliant, making that more transparent on our website, and that's something that we can do without. We don't need a rule change for that. Like, we can actually do that later this year.
Okay, so now that I've muddied the waters a little bit, perhaps take us through and let's focus on the statutory recommendations first.
Wonderful. All right, like we were discussing, the first 3 I'm gonna present on our statutory changes. So yes, they would require legislation and then changes to state law to take effect. So my first option is option 1A, and this would authorize systems to create an education or non-compliance policy and the creation of guidance documents and sample policies. So this option was initially brought up during the Telfer Governance Project in 2024 and would simply authorize systems to create a policy that reflects or adds to the MET requirements and includes procedures for handling trustees non-compliant with training. At this time, the PRB is aware of at least 5 systems that either have a policy governing training requirements or local statute requiring MET compliance. Option 1A received mostly positive feedback from stakeholders during both the virtual feedback session and this first round of written comments. One system voiced support for this option and how flexible this option is for systems rather than requiring a policy. And another system stated that guidance materials would be helpful for their board to begin discussing a policy. One system cautioned the PRB to ensure statute is not too restrictive for systems or non-compliant trustees. Option 1B is very similar to 1A, but instead it would require systems to create an education or non-compliance policy. A lot of the logistics of option 1A would apply here, including the PRB creating sample policies and guidance documents for systems to utilize to fit the policy for their system. But this option would make the policy a requirement. Staff did not receive any specific comments on this option. Staff intend for either option 1A or B to be quite open-ended for systems and allow them to tailor a policy to their board, with the biggest difference being whether it's required or not. Guidance documents and sample policies could go more in depth as to what systems could potentially include in their policy, including potential procedures for dealing with non-compliant trustees. At this time, we don't have any specific restrictions in mind that should be included in the policy, and we assume leaving those matters up to systems to decide on or adopt.
Alright, so option 1A, there's nothing right now prohibiting a plan from having an education or non-compliance policy. It's just that if you put it into statute as an authorizing, that it would remind the trustees that perhaps it would be a good idea to have such a policy. So 1A is really just something that would go into the statute as a reminder. But 1B would have the teeth of requiring that each trust develop some sort of policy.
So I have a clarifying question. Are we saying an education or non-compliance policy, is that the same policy and we're just calling it an education policy or a non-compliance policy? Or are we giving them the choice of adopting either an education policy or a non-compliance policy?
Yeah, I believe it would be kind of just up to like naming choice. Our idea here is we know that there is a system that has an education policy, and in that policy they have additional education requirements as well as like procedures for non-compliant trustees. But systems may just want to adopt a non-compliance policy that just specifies what the procedures are for non-compliant trustees, but they may not want to add on to the current MET requirements and create more educational requirements for their trustees.
I guess I'm just concerned that if we're giving the option of 2 different policies, that they could adopt an education policy that doesn't address non-compliance, which is kind of the
Yeah,
part of what we're trying to do here.
We can call it something different if you like. I don't know, compliance policy.
Yeah, or an education and non-compliance policy, so that it's one policy that covers.
Yeah.
Both subject matter.
Yeah, we could do that.
make that. Once we've discussed the 3 options for statutory changes, then I'd like to open it up, for a decision as to whether or not we want to, try to move forward with a recommendation for statutory changes at this point in time.
So just to clarify, what we had thought was that we could present these recommendations to the full board today and get your feedback. And then we would have another opportunity to send them out to stakeholders for feedback.
Okay,
Like, we don't have like, any motions or anything for
Right.
action today.
Yeah.
Cause just with changes like this, like, we usually give stakeholders multiple bites at the apple, so.
all right, please go ahead.
Okay, I'm gonna move on to option 2. So option 2A would suspend a trustee's ability to vote on their board if they are not compliant with the core training requirements. This would mean that if a trustee has finished their first year of service and has not completed the required 7 hours of core training, then they would not be able to vote on their board until the training is completed and reported to the PRB. Staff did not receive any comments on this option. Option 2B would suspend a trustee's ability to vote on their board if they are not compliant with the MET requirements. This would mean that if a trustee has finished any of their MET cycles without completing the required training, then they would not be able to vote on their board until the training is completed and reported to the PRB. Stakeholders during the virtual feedback session were not in favor of this option, with 2 systems voicing their concern for the impacts the options could have on a trustee's ability to perform their duties, and another system concerned that this option could affect smaller systems' ability to fill board seats. Staff did not receive any comments about this option during the first round of written feedback. The PRB is aware that smaller systems, especially smaller Telfer systems, struggle filling some board seats which can lead to a smaller board. This was discussed during the 2024 Telfer governance project as well. Some systems have mentioned that having these issues and potentially restricting voting for non-compliant systems could negatively impact smaller systems' ability to vote on certain matters.
And again, and Chris, please, add anything to this. In our discussions, while there's sympathy for how difficult it is to recruit, trustees. You know, for us, the issue really was if you are managing large sums of money that are coming out of people's paychecks, then you agreed to take on the responsibility. And that responsibility includes these training requirements. And so, with respect to the small system question, the MET committee, the training committee didn't really have a lot of sympathy for that argument. And just to clarify, option 2A is if you're not compliant with your core training. And I guess I could see in a situation where a new trustee in their first year is allowed to vote under this option until they are not compliant with their core training, and then they lose the opportunity to vote. Under option 2B, again, they could vote until they're not compliant with either the core training requirements or then subsequent ongoing training requirements. So this doesn't change our rule for how or when you are compliant with training, but it just says you lose your opportunity to vote if you are not compliant. And again, I make sure that I have summarized this correctly.
So, I have a lot of questions from me. When, how, can you remind me, because I think you covered it, but can you remind me how we're reporting a trustee's non-compliance? To the public, not to the administrator.
Okay, to the public, yeah. So right now, we are doing annual MET compliance reports. And a trustee is considered not compliant if a cycle has lapsed. So it is the end of the cycle, and right now for CE cycles and most core cycles, that is the December 31st of every year. Once that date has passed and they have not reported training by the April 1st reporting deadline, they are not compliant. they can submit training to us at any time throughout the year, so that can be rectified at any time. But yeah, on our annual MET compliance report, if they are still in a cycle, and they have not completed training for that cycle yet, but they've done all the training for previous cycles, then they are just considered in progress, which is considered compliant in our MET compliance reports.
But how is it? I mean, if someone was watching a board meeting and they wanted to know if a trustee was authorized to vote on an item because they were either compliant or not compliant, how would they get that information?
Yeah, currently that is in our board meeting packet, and in years when we do our biannual report, it is included in our biannual report, which is on our website.
Just something to add is I think that it would ultimately be on the systems to enforce this, because there's no way for us to, like, if we can provide the information, like, we are doing everything we can to provide compliance information. But it's gonna be up to systems to look, okay, who's compliant, who's not compliant, who's eligible to vote and not.
I guess my thought process with this is that I understand the spirit of what we're trying to do. I do have concerns about like unintended consequences to the extent that you have someone voting who otherwise should not be voting. Like what happens if they're voting and they're making changes to investments or they're doing other business? And it's a split vote and it passes because one or more members who should not have voted. And what procedural problems does that create for that board?
Yeah.
And I struggle
Chair-
because I know that they have.
Chair
teeth,
Levy.
I know they have teeth, and I know that we don't wanna say you can't sit on the board if you're not compliant or you have to be removed. But I don't know if this is. If this
Chair
is
Levy.
it.
I mean, I think it's a very valid point because of the fact that they could be signing contracts that ultimately would not be valid because they were not authorized by a vote. And, you know, to Amy's point, I mean, it's going to be really dependent on the boards to self-enforce these rules. But ultimately, if they don't enforce the rules, then they're the ones who are going to pay the consequence of, you know, having allowed somebody to vote when they were not authorized to do so. You know, the biggest challenge I have is philosophically 100% aligned with, you know, the education committee. And that is that if somebody's going to agree to sit on a board and they're not willing to do the small amount of the time that it takes to actually be trained on how to do the job well and to take care of people's livelihood and make sure they could eat and have food and, you know, housing and all that other kind of stuff, which is really what they are doing, then, you know, I don't want to let them off the hook because of the fact that they might mess up and then all of a sudden, you know, have a problem because they mess up. I'd much rather tell them that this is what's expected, this is what's required, and anyone who signs up for that role knows it. And that's what's expected of them. You know, while I am speaking, I mean, I'm very much in favor for it being statutory, and option 1B, if I remember correctly, is the one that is definitively in statute that they have to have a plan and they have to have a definitive way in which to enforce, you know, that plan. I am in favor of, you know, the option 2B here, which is if they don't stay up with their training, then they need to come off the board. And for all the small plans that are out there that are, you know, concerned about being able to recruit, you know, board members, it is a real thing. It is hard, but the responsibility is important. And it's important enough for everybody in the community to say, who's the right person to do this, not just who has time to do it. And then, you know, I would call on the business communities of these smaller plans to where, you know, this is your backyard, this is your home, this is, you know, your protection, whether it be police or fire or employees of the city or the county, whatever it may be that this plan covers. Find the right people. there are people out there that will serve the community if they understand the importance of it. And taking care of these people's lives, to me, is important enough to have us as a PRB enforce every way that we possibly can the compliance with, at least we know they have a clue and making the best decisions they can with good information, and that they've actually taken the time and invested, energy in being trained to do the job very, very well. So I very much understand the concerns. I think it's this particular board's responsibility to do what's best for the retirees and the employees. And that ultimately means we have to be a little bit more heavy-handed. Then I think that's the role we have to play.
All right, let's go ahead and talk about option 3, or why don't you describe option 3, and then let's come back to trying to, again, knowing that this will go out for comments. But I think I would like to hear whether the board has a realistic expectation that we could ask for one or more of these options to be included in legislation in the next legislative session, or whether we need to defer that for a session. So go ahead with option 3, and then we'll come back to a discussion.
May I just add as well that because we're gonna have another opportunity to send this out to stakeholders, if the board has additional modifications or changes or new ideas that you wanna see us propose, then we can take those notes and update the document.
All right, go ahead, please.
So option 3 would require trustees to complete core training before they can serve on the board. The PRB did not receive any comments supporting this option, but 2 systems from both the virtual stakeholder meeting and the first round of written feedback were concerned about potential timing constraints with this option. Some systems have new trustees join their board close to their next board meeting, which could have impacts to their board if the new member has not completed their training. After receiving feedback on option 3, staff have proposed a new option that has not yet been sent to stakeholders for feedback. Option 3A would specify in statute that core training must be completed as soon as practical after a trustee's appointment, election, or hire, but no later than the timeline required in PRB rule. This new option encourages the timely completion of core training while still giving some flexibility to systems and trustees. This language is similar to that in statutes for other types of training requirements.
So option 3A really doesn't change anything. Option 3 would change our rule, meaning that you wouldn't, if you're appointed to a board before September, you have to the end of that year to complete your core training. If you're appointed after September, you've got the following calendar year to complete your core training. So option 3 would change that and say, you can't do any voting on the board until you completed your core. So that would be a definite change to what we permit now. Option 3A wouldn't change what we permit now, but would just kind of encourage people to do their core training earlier.
Yeah, that's correct. And option 3, just to clarify, would require them to complete the core training before they can serve on the board, not just vote.
I'm not in her option. I think it's a little bit too. I think it's a little too heavy-handed. I feel like we've always provided people with, a time frame to come into compliance. And it just feels like, especially if we know that there are systems out there that have, local government appointments or appointments that are made in close proximity to a board meeting. Then I could see, especially we're not talking about voting, we're talking about serving, so then you're gonna open the entire board up into foreign issues for their meeting. And other logistics, and so I think you know, at least for option 3, I think it's just maybe. A bridge
Chair
too long.
Libby, Chair
Yeah.
Libby here. I would agree with you. I'm very much, as I obviously stated, very much in favor of being heavy-handed. But to put a board in a position to where, you know, a week and a half before a board meeting, they got to get somebody in, trained, et cetera, before they can vote, that's to me a bridge too far. You know, option 3A doesn't have any teeth at all. It basically says we're going to reiterate what we've already reiterated. So I don't think either one of these particularly do much. Certainly, I wouldn't put option 3A, you know, into statute, because it's not worth the effort to try to do that, because it just says, by the way, we have a rule, just you have to comply with it, which we already say that. So I'm not supportive of either one of these particular options.
All right, so then let's circle back to, all right, you're trying to determine what to put out for further comment.
Mhm.
And so do we want to modify any of these options before they go for further comment? And I think what I'm hearing is that perhaps option 3 and 3A should be struck. Is that,
I would be in favor of striking 3 and 3A.
anybody differ on that? Okay, so I think that those are gone. You know, again, I understand that there is an issue here about what we can get into a bill. But again, I also hear, even if we know that there's difficulty in getting something into a bill, if we feel strongly, we should still try. So I'm in favor of still keeping options 1A and 1B, you know, as possibilities for a statutory comment, and I do kind of favor 1B personally. With respect to option 2, I think Stephanie provided some interesting, you know, thoughtful feedback on option 2, which is, again, how do you know when a person is suspended from their ability to vote? And so I almost think option 2 needs some work, either 2A or 2B. So that, you know,
Well,
it's clarified.
the way, yeah, I mean, I think we can clarify it when we actually start getting to what the wording is actually in the bill. I mean, ultimately, it's going to be incumbent upon the board to govern themselves. You know, they're allocating millions and millions and millions of dollars, in this case, billions of dollars. They should be capable of making sure they know who has passed their test. And if they cannot do that, then that's a different conversation we need to have with them. But I would have no problem sitting in front of a hearing in the House or the Senate saying these people are making decisions on, you know, people's livelihood. They need to know if they're eligible to take that vote. And the chair of that and the administrators of that board should know who's eligible for a vote. So I don't think we have to solve for that here. It will have to be solved in the final language. But I think the way it's written conceptually is, you know, if they're not compliant, they don't get to vote. And if they are compliant, they get to vote. And I think the more we keep it simple and keep it scalable, the better it's going to be. And I'm very confident that the legislature would agree that people who haven't bothered to do the homework shouldn't be able to pass the class, if you will.
I'm in agreement with Mr. Zook.
So with that comment, Stephanie, would you still be in agreement that we could put out options 1A, 1B, 2A, and 2B for further comment?
Yeah, I would be in favor of that. I mean, when we're looking at 1A and 1B, I think if we're going a statutory route, I'd prefer to just go 1B. and make it a requirement as opposed to just a authorization, because I don't know why a statutory change is necessary,
For 1A.
for 1A. So if we're gonna go the way of legislation, I prefer to just go 1B. And I mean, as it relates to 2, I completely understand that, you know, the concept of the voting, but part of me almost feels like if we're gonna go the statutory route, we should just speak to their ability to serve on the board as a whole and not just vote on matters.
All right, so Stephanie, what you're suggesting is that option 2.
Yeah.
Would, rather than we say ability to vote, would be ability to serve.
Let me chime in. I was on mute. Sorry. If you'll page back to option 1, I want to address Chair Libby's comment. Went one too far. There we go. I agree. Option 1A does not need to be in statute. It's authorizing systems to do something. We don't need that to be in statute. If we decide to take this to statute, then option 1B is the only, to me, logical path to go. If we go to option 2, please. Yeah, option 2, my concern with overly simplifying it to they can't serve if they haven't done it gets back to that same challenge of what happens if they have a board meeting, they need to have a quorum, they have somebody that they've appointed, but they haven't completed their core training, and then all of a sudden they don't have a quorum and don't have a board member. So my concern of the unintended consequence would be that it would limit the ability of that board to function. Whereas, as an example, if it was not compliant with the MET requirements and in that there is a reasonable period of time for that to occur, then obviously they have the ability to appoint somebody, get to a quorum, make the vote that they have to be able to do their job. And then from there, that person has a period of time that's reasonable to be able to take their testing. And so what I would suggest is that we distribute for comment to the systems. Maybe it's an option 2C, right? To Chair Libby's point of, just they can't serve if they haven't done it, and then give them option 2B with the indication that, one of these is going to go into statute. At least that's the board's position, we think. And we really need their comments of which of those they think is better, because they're going to know more about the operations of their day-to-day, quarter-to-quarter cycle and their appointment cycle, et cetera. So I think we could put both of those out and get comments and see what people think is, most realistic, and let them help us identify unintended consequences that perhaps none of us, have thought of.
All right, so just a reminder here. The way options 2A and 2B are structured right now, for a new board member, they won't be considered non-compliant until the end of that calendar year. Where, they have that first calendar year to get their core training. So you could have a situation where you have a new board member, they're serving, they're voting until they're not compliant at the end of the calendar year, then they would lose the ability to serve or vote, depending on how we phrase it. So just so you know, they do have a reasonable period of time. And again, remember, our rules are that and correct me if I'm wrong, Jasmine, if you are hired as an administrator or you become a trustee before September 1, you have to the end of that calendar year. So you have 4 months to complete core training. If you are hired after or on or after September 1, you have those 4 months plus the entire next calendar year. So there is a very reasonable period of time to get your core training done. Does that change anything you said?
To me, it doesn't, because I think we have to get, and again, this is why I'd love the feedback from the systems, because I feel like they need to have the ability to operate their board. And if somebody has to complete all their core training before they can even serve, then we run the risk of them not being able to get to quorum and things of that nature. But if they prefer that path, instead of somebody being eligible and then not eligible, then, certainly it would accomplish our mission, which is to make sure people are trained without impeding with their ability to function. If they prefer the latter, which is, give them a reasonable period of time, knowing that they're going to be serving, they can function as a board, they can hopefully be in more listening mode as opposed to voting mode, but, they're still going to have a vote. If they say that's better for the way they operate, then obviously, we certainly want to take that into consideration. But that's why I feel like you give them, both Chair Libby's suggestion of just don't let them serve at all, or the MET requirements. If they are not compliant, then they don't get to vote.
All right, so am I hearing this correctly? We would offer option 2A, which has the vote issue. We would offer 2B, which is also with respect to vote. Then there would be a new option 2C that would suspend a trustee's ability to serve if not compliant with MEP requirements.
I'll speak for myself only. I don't see a need for 2A if you have 2B. And I think 2C is a very good add. So my position would be, and certainly open to everybody else's thoughts, would be we just distribute to option 2B and option 2C and give them those two choices, because I think option 2B accomplishes everything that's already in option 2A. That's at least the way I read it.
And to clarify, just for my understanding, 2B is the timeline you discussed earlier, right? So after September 1st, they have 15 months. Before
Yes.
September 1st, they have through the end of the year. Is that correct?
Right. And then after that, let's say they complete, they're compliant with core. Then after that, they have to complete 2 hours of training every year. Correct.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add for my 2C, if we could just offer, offer some grace period, whether it's 3 months or 6 months, right? Like they would be non-compliant after the April 1st reporting deadline. And then they have, say, a 3-month period where you have 3 months to come back into compliance, and if you don't come back into compliance in that 3-month period, then your ability to serve is suspended.
I think it's a very reasonable position.
Okay.
I agree.
Jasmine, do you need anything more from us on this?
I don't believe so.
I would also direct to the ED. Are you comfortable with where we're at here?
That's up to y'all. I think I have good notes. So.
Okay, very good.
Is there
All right.
one additional comment from me? Is there any, while we're writing this, consideration for, is there any need to consider adding a layer where the person who is not yet compliant, even if they're within the window, cannot serve as an officer of the board? Because I've seen situations where someone new comes to the board, there's been a little bit of politics that have occurred, and the new person is recently appointed or voted in. And so there's confidence that they're sort of an outsider and becoming an officer of the board, or voted in as an officer of the board. So preventing that from happening.
I very much support that. I mean, to me, it's an additional layer of protection that not only are they, not if they're not in compliant, they certainly don't need to be an officer.
Right.
So I think it's an extra, incentive for people to be sure they're compliant, because then they have the ability to not only vote, but they also can be in leadership and be an officer. So I certainly support that as well.
Okay, so that would not be necessary for the 2C requirement because they're not serving. If they're not compliant.
Correct.
But it would come under the option 2B, where maybe there's option 2B1 and 2B2. 2B1 is as it's stated, and 2B2 is not only can you not vote, you cannot serve as an officer of the fund. Did I hear that correctly?
That's my thought, yes.
Okay. So we will have 3 options under 2. Option 2A, as stated here, will go away. Option 2B perhaps becomes a new 2A. Then there's a new 2B, which is 2B with the additional comment that if your ability to vote and or serve as an officer of the fund, if you're not compliant, you would lose that. And then 2C is you cannot serve if you are not compliant. Any other discussion on that? All right, let's go with the non-regulatory suggestions.
Okay, as Ms. Dush mentioned, the next 3 options I'll present on are non-statutory changes. So they don't require any legislation, and they are agency actions, and as I mentioned earlier, just one of them may require rule change, but I will make sure to say which one it is once we get to it. So option 4 would provide more information and promote the individual course approval application. As a side note, this course is used when trustees take courses, individual courses that are not accepted for MET credit, but they can submit an application to get that one course approved for MET credit. So the PRB would provide more information about this form on its website and directly to all system administrators, so they are made more aware of the application and its requirements. A lot of the current communications about the application are one-on-one with administrators as needed. Usually if they're reporting training to the agency that is not approved for MET credit, and staff recommend they submit an application to apply for credit. The PRB does have information about the individual course approval application on the agency website, but this would be additional information to hopefully expand administrators' knowledge on different ways their trustees can get training. Staff also suggests publishing a list of recently approved individual courses on its website for systems to see which courses can be approved for MET credit. Systems would submit their own application to the PRB, but the process would be a lot quicker and easier for both staff and systems, while also showing administrators alternative courses other systems are utilizing. One system voiced support for this option during the virtual feedback session, but staff did not receive any additional feedback during the first round of written feedback.
Any concerns with that? All right, let's go on.
For option 5, the PRB would publish a list of non-compliant trustees and administrators on the PRB website after the annual MET compliance report is presented to the board. It would include a list of all trustees and administrators that were labeled as not compliant on the report and would be updated as they become compliant. Staff did not receive any comments from stakeholders opposing this idea, but did get some comments from systems during the virtual stakeholder meeting that suggested the PRB notify systems of their trustees' compliance prior to publication. In the past, PRB staff has sent out a notice of the upcoming annual compliance report prior to the board meeting and encouraged systems to request an MET compliance report to see their trustees' current compliance status. With the most recent updates to the online portal, this information is readily available to systems at any time without a request, so upcoming notices will ask systems to check the portal. The PRB has also sent out 2 additional emails in the past to systems with below 50% of their trustees compliant and to systems with 0% of their trustees compliant. Both emails notify systems of their compliance numbers and of the upcoming compliance report. If this option were to be adopted by the board, Staff would continue to notify systems prior to the annual MET compliance report and remind systems that non-compliant trustees will be posted on the PRB website, while also encouraging administrators to check the online portal to see their trustees' compliance. Two other systems also voiced support for this option during the first round of written feedback, with one appreciating notices staff have sent in during previous compliance reports, and the other saying this list could pressure trustees to become compliant.
Any issues with this option?
No, I mean, we already post when systems are not compliant online, so it seems like that follows suit.
Yeah.
As long as you don't post an inaccurate, someone inaccurately on the list, I think you're fine.
Okay. All right, go on.
And our last option here is option 6. This was proposed by the Education Committee and would create a new training requirement for system administrators and/or board chairs to complete an orientation course. The orientation course could include an overview of the relationship between administrators and the PRB, reporting requirements, training requirements, and ways the PRB can be a resource. Staff has noticed some cases where a system gets a new administrator that is not aware of the PRB requirements, which leads the system to be behind in reporting and training compliance. The Education Committee and staff created this option to try and bridge the information gap that can occur. Staff didn't receive any comments supporting this option, but did receive one comment opposing the option. That same system proposed that if the PRB does go through with this option, to only require systems without 100% compliance to complete such course. Staff anticipate a potential update to MET rules would be needed, which could be made during the 2028 rule review or earlier if needed.
So for this option 6, I think I like the idea in concept. I just don't know if it should be a requirement. Like, to the extent that the PRB wants to create this orientation course and offer it as a service, you know, to an administrator who may have a knowledge gap, I can definitely see how it would be helpful. And if you encounter an administrator who has that knowledge gap, to make them aware of the course, instead of we need to require that all administrators and chairs take the course.
I completely agree. If we're going to force people to do certain things, they need to be really, really important. And this is important for them to understand it, but if they already understand it and they already know it, or they take the initiative themselves, I don't think us requiring it is going to, you know, add enough value to justify the time, energy, and effort of a lot of people who may not need it. So I'm not supportive of option 6.
Would it count if, let's say we create it and, you know, it's something that you would think you would take in your first year of service? Would without the rule change, it won't count toward core hours. So then, you know, the whole thing is, this would be something that wouldn't give you any credit. Is that okay?
I think that's okay because of the fact that I think that, you know, the system that made the recommendation of only requiring systems without 100% compliance to complete such course, you know, if somebody doesn't want to complete the course, they've got to get in compliance. That I think is good, and they shouldn't get extra credit because they're not compliant. So I think if somebody voluntarily does it and wants to spend the time as part of their training, you know, it would be nice for them to get credit for that. But ultimately, I don't think that's the reason why somebody should do it. They should do it because it's the right thing. But I'm not sure we want to go through the rule changing process to be able to allow somebody to get, you know, extra credit for doing, you know, this course versus the other courses that are there. But, you know, if we can't even do that until 2028, my suggestion would be that we leave this maybe as a rule that if you are not in compliance, then we need to do it and add that other layer of credit at the same time, if that's the way that the process works, which is, I think, what I heard you say.
So at this point, would we want to just make the option that staff will create a new training program for system administrators and or board chairs as an orientation process? So we essentially, if we get some feedback that this would be helpful, we would direct staff to create a program. Then we would defer a decision about whether or not it becomes a requirement for all or for those who are not compliant or something like that down the road.
Or just make it an MET course, but if they take it, they get course credit for it.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. And the good news is that, it all can be effectively done by staff one time, videoed, and then simply just updated whenever such time as the rules change. So I think it's a really good endeavor for staff to do. And then 100%, making it an MET course is a wonderful solution for that. I think it's a great suggestion.
Is there a carryover? If in your first year, if you do 8 hours instead of 7, can that count toward your next year's?
No,
Compliance?
our rules don't permit carryover.
Okay.
I was just gonna add, we do have a continuing education course currently that overviews the PRB as an agency, different reporting requirements and training requirements. But it's only available for continuing education credit, so, trustees and administrators can take that course after their first year of service. So that is currently available on our education website. But like I said, it's only available for CE credit. But the idea of this course was that it would be given to system administrators and board chairs as they start that position, to make them aware of those requirements earlier in their.
But would this be different than the course we already have?
It doesn't sound like it, because that course exists already for CE credit. I think this would be more in depth and probably be a lot more tailored to system administrators, probably include like our portal and certain things like that. As the CE course that exists right now is quite an overarching overview of certain requirements and what we do as an agency.
And I guess where I'm coming out is do we just want to direct staff to take a look at that course and see if it needs to be enhanced? And, again, we have a situation here where we would like people to do it in their first year, but it's not gonna count toward their core. And so, they can take it again for CE credit down the road, but in their first year, they wouldn't get credit for it.
I just want to add that they could still take the course even if they don't get credit. It's not a very long course and it could still be very helpful for the administrator or board chair. And another thing that we do on request is we will do either virtual or in-person orientations. We've had a couple of those just in the last year where we've been asked by new executive directors of pension systems to kind of do a meet and greet where we actually go through and talk about the reporting requirements and the MET requirements. So we're always available for systems that want to have that more kind of personalized approach.
All right. Do we see a need for option 6 at this point in time?
I don't personally, if we have an existing course that substantially covers this. And even if that course can be slightly updated to cover the new portal, I think that's sufficient for what this was trying to do.
Agreed.
Chris Zook, Chris Gonzalez?
Yes, I agree. After this conversation, I agree.
I agree with that as well.
All right, so we can drop option 6. All right, take us to the end here.
Okay, we're getting there. This last slide is just general feedback that we got from systems. So one system encouraged the PRB to explore all non-statutory ideas prior to taking any statutory steps, as it offers immediate remedies to compliance issues. A different system added that the PRB should explore more CE options. Staff believe that option 4, which would expand the individual course approval application information, could expand systems MET offerings, as well as the PRB's current efforts to improve its relationship with existing training providers and potential new training providers. A system also asks the PRB to carefully consider the potential impacts any of the proposed changes that MET program could have on retirement systems, specifically regarding possible additional administrative responsibilities and deterrence to prospective new trustees. And here is a timeline of the project after today's meeting. Staff will update its summary document of potential changes to include the board's suggestions and send it out for stakeholder feedback. This will be the last opportunity for systems to give their feedback on these options, and staff highly encourage systems to send us any of their thoughts about these options. Then staff will present the final statutory and non-statutory changes at the September board meeting for potential adoption by the board. And recommendations adopted by the board will be included in the biennial report to the legislature in November. That is all that I prepared for today. If there aren't any more questions.
Are there any further questions or discussion from the board? Well, hearing none, thank you, Ms. Loomis. And Madam Chair, this concludes the Education Committee business.
Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item number 8, which is the investment committee. So I'll call on Mr. Zook to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair Libby. I will make a motion that we take a 6-minute break in order to stretch our legs.
Perfect.
That was probably good, right, because initially, yeah, we had the break. After education video. Actually, it was usually pretty long, and you thought it would be long, but it worked out well.
Yeah, you didn't get the line for, we thought you were gonna get it, but we got it.
But it works, yeah.
I think it was really frustrating.
Yeah.
It is, but it's okay. I think what I lacked is a real understanding how the board uses
Madam Chair, are we ready to roll, or we need a little bit more time? I show the room still on mute, so I don't know if you can hear me, but
Can you hear us now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. We're still waiting for a couple more people to come back into the room, so we'll start shortly.
Thank you. I'll be on standby.
Need more?
They turned off their video, but they'll turn it back.
Okay.
They need to do that before we.
Okay, the time is now 12:18. And we have all members who were present at today's meeting back in attendance, and so we'll resume today's meeting. So now I will turn it over to Ms. Gibson to walk us through the investment committee agenda item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will now call on Robert Munter, Senior Investment Analyst, to present item 8A.
Good afternoon, members. So my name is Robert Munter. I'm the staff senior investment analyst, and I will be taking us through item 8A today, which is the investment data report. So first, just as a brief overview of what we will be covering today. So we will be going over some updates that we have received from systems regarding their annual reports. And this is mainly from the number of systems, about 30 or so, that do report earlier in the year. As Brian mentioned earlier, during our meeting, we do receive the bulk of our reports around this time, and in the coming weeks, we will have a lot more updates. So in the future meetings, we will have a lot larger update for you regarding the performance of the systems. But additionally, we will also be covering some improvements on the investment data report that we will be looking to do in the coming meetings. And this is from a couple of comments that a number of you have made over the past couple of meetings, and some additional requests that we've had. And then part of that is we will go over some potential new performance measures that we are looking into, as well as some preliminary information regarding liquidity measures from pensions. And with that, we will go ahead and we will jump into just a brief overview of the updates that we have been seeing from systems. So as we've mentioned before, and you may know, the markets have been performing fairly well for systems. And so from the reports that we have been seeing from systems, they have been having good returns, which means that how they've been performing has been improving. So that's the trend that we do like to see. And so with that, a number of systems have increased in the amount that are beating their actuarial assumptions that they have right now. And a larger number are within 1% of their actual return assumption that they are targeting right now. So all in all, this is a good thing for our pension systems, that they're having good performances, and that's what we want to see. And so it's in the right trend. On this slide, we do cover a little bit more so what we're seeing from the systems in regards to where they're falling compared to that actuarial target. And this is just on 10-year basis, so the really good thing here is that a lot larger number of systems, so from last time we reported in December, 7 systems were exceeding their return assumption by 1% or more. And now we're looking at more at 18, so that's a really good, strong performance from a lot larger number of systems. So that's a good thing, and then again, the trend has been moving towards a very positive year, so everything has been essentially being pulled up towards either positive returns or exceeding that. Now with that though, part of the things that we are looking for to improve on our investment data report, and these are things that will be brought up to the investment committee meeting in September, is that we are looking to also include, and this is from some comments that we've received in the past, is including some additional benchmark context with the performance report. And so this would just be a passive blended benchmark. And really the whole point of this is to provide some additional context when looking at the returns for systems using a passive blended benchmark that gives us a little bit of an idea on one, how the market's performing, but also two, what are low fee passive investments, how are they able to do? And it gives us also a little bit of idea on context of active versus passive management. Now, what we ultimately will use will be something that the investment committee will decide upon, as there are some factors that do play into there with, say, systems that do use real estate or have certain types of asset allocations. What's the appropriate benchmark that we would want to use? But one of the main reasons that we want to sort of point this out is that if we were to look at how this passive blended benchmark that we just have here for today, how it was performing in 2024 at the end of the year, you'll see that it was a 6.55% return on a 10-year basis. And then moving to 2025, it moves all the way up to 8.33. So that's just providing a good idea on just how well the markets have been performing. So when we start to see those additional reports come in this year for the remaining 70, we should see hopefully that trend continue and see a lot of large improvements from our systems as far as their performance is going. But additionally, having a benchmark, it does help us also look at how many systems are beating that benchmark, and using something like a 60/40 or a blended one that we would create and use provides us another level of context that we can use for the systems rather than comparing off of just their actual return assumption or one that they're using themselves. Essentially just having a nice little standard that we can use for everyone. Now, additionally, with some of the things that we're looking to improve upon for our report and reviewing how a system is performing is we need to also consider, what are they doing with their actuarial assumptions, and ultimately, right, what are they expecting from their returns? And part of this goes with their capital market expectations in the past versus where they're at now. So a good thing that we've seen from systems is that they have been lowering their return assumption. And part of that could be from, one of two reasons, as well as potentially some others, but mainly it's either from a lowering of the return assumption because they're moving it towards a more reasonable and conservative assumption, or two, also the capital markets, if we were to look at it 10 years ago, they have definitely changed to where they are now. So those are some of the two reasons why a system may be decreasing their return assumption. But when we start to look at this on our performance measures, we want to make sure that we are understanding what that means for systems, as well as being able to compare that number and keep that in mind when we're looking at the performance. So when we're looking at this slide, you'll see that just on average, most systems have decreased their investment return assumption by 69 basis points over the past 10 years. And what that ultimately means for systems, and this is a metric that we're looking to potentially use and explore, and essentially this metric that we're looking to add is to help us understand what does lowering those return assumptions look like, and what is this impact on systems as far as performance and just what they are ultimately doing. So essentially with this drift benefit metric that we're looking to potentially use in the future is it is a way to measure and show on a compounded level over a long-term basis what that drift and or the lowering of the return assumption has done for a system. So obviously lowering your return assumption does mean that it's easier to meet your performance benchmark, right? Because as it's lowered, it's easier to meet that, which depending upon the reason, it can be a good or bad thing for you. But the ultimate thing here is on a compounded level over a long-term basis, what does this really mean? So that lowering of the return assumptions by the 69 basis points means that over a compounded level for 10 years, it's meaning that 5.9% of that performance level, you don't have to meet anymore. So that's just something that we would want to start to show with that, because some systems may have more reasonable assumptions, and then those that have maybe assumptions that are too high, when they lower it, it makes it easier, right, for them to see those performance levels or beat that performance. And so ultimately try to have these metrics here helps us a little bit understand a little bit better of why are they performing now, or how would they have performed in the past. And to sort of help explain that, on this slide, when we're looking at who is really outperforming, this is where, when we start to sort of look at this and why it's important that we would maybe start to include some type of metric like this, is that if we look at from the past to now, 22 systems beat both their current and their past actuarial target. 11 systems only cleared their current target because they lowered their return assumption, while 54 systems missed both their past and their current target. And this is basically just trying to help show, and the whole point of having a compounded metric here is that having small underperformances, it may not seem like much, but on a long-term basis, as those compound, it can add up to quite a bit. So if we were just to look at just the gap from their original assumption 10 years ago, systems would be underperforming or not have met that performance level that they were expecting by 9.1%. So that's a pretty large amount if we were to think about that. But it may not seem like that when you're just looking at just the raw numbers itself of maybe it's just a 0.5% or so in the return assumption. So having this compounded number really helps bring it to the perspective of just how quickly these things can grow over a long-term basis. So with that, the other piece that we're looking to include with the investment data report in the future, and what we do have some preliminary information right now, is on the portfolio liquidity for systems. So this was something that we've talked about in the past about looking to include. So right now, staff has spent some time going through reports for systems, and we have been gathering liquidity data across all of our pensions. And right now, the key takeaways that we can provide here is that the vast majority of the systems, as we would normally expect, do have a very large daily and or weekly liquid level. So basically just very liquid assets, generally mutual funds, things that trade very easily. For the larger systems, this is where we start to see them start to include more illiquid investments, which is what we would expect, because generally with the more illiquid investments, you can demand a little bit more return from those. So staff right now, we're working on still finalizing some of this information and then verifying anything with systems if we have any questions. But the point of this is that we just wanted to help provide a little bit more information regarding them and sort of show what we see. So the big takeaways, if we were to take a look at this slide, is just that over half of the systems essentially have no or very little amounts of illiquid assets. And then again, as we scale up to those larger systems, that's when we start to see the illiquidity level start to rise. And then it goes up to about 40% or so for a couple of the systems. And that's where we get to this slide, which is just covering that just on a preliminary basis, what we have right now, we're seeing that basically systems with billions in assets are where we start to see the larger percentages of illiquid assets. And then systems that are less than 500 million have a very small amount of illiquid assets. And these brackets and buckets that we're using right now, we can potentially change those later to reflect and hone in more on some of those very small systems. But generally the very small systems are just doing mutual funds to where it's highly liquid assets. But again, this will be something that will be brought up to the investment committee, and then will be something that we will provide more details to the full board, as well as looking to potentially include this just on an ongoing basis with our investment data report. And then that brings us finally to our key takeaways that we wanted to just cover in this meeting, which is just that right now, the trend that we have been seeing from systems, and just because of the positive market, is that most systems are starting to exceed or are within 1% of their return targets, which is a good thing. We do want to start to look to include those passive benchmarks to help provide some additional context for systems as to how they're performing. And then again, the positive side of the declining investment return assumptions has been that systems are potentially looking to have more conservative targets, and also including a new metric here for that could help us better understand what level of performance that we are seeing from systems. And then finally, we have some additional pension liquidity metrics that we're looking to include that will inform the board on and more at a later meeting. But ultimately, that brings us to the end here where a lot of this will be covered and discussed at the investment committee meeting in September. And this information will start to show up more in future board meetings and in our reports. And then we are open to any other requests for information that you would like us to include in the report and or research for the board. There are a couple other outstanding items that were not mentioned in this particular meeting, but that we're working on. But again, we're open to any additional requests.
Thank you, Mr. Munner. Any questions from the board?
Comment from me. I appreciate the formatting of the slides. I think they're well put together and easy to understand, so thank you.
I really appreciate the modifications that you've made here. And I especially I'm appreciative of the passive benchmark developing that sort of analysis. The only thought I had about that was that I would even perhaps suggest even a simpler passive benchmark, you know, a 60-40 balance fund, where, you know, rather than including real estate or something like that. But again, that's just my thought on that. And again, I always reiterate that the actuarial expected return on assets is not an investment target. It is just set at a point in time based on capital market assumptions at that point in time as to what you would expect over looking ahead over a very long period of time. Using it as a measure for past performance, it, in my mind, as an actuary, isn't really relevant. Benchmark comparisons are what is relevant, but I also understand you're dealing with 101 pension plans. Each of them has a very unique demographic perspective. And so I realize that, you know, really trying to get at benchmark performance compared to actual performance is very tough. The other thing that, you know, when I think of liquidity, I like what you've done here, but I also think of liquidity on a you know, cash needs. What is the net non-investment cash flow? And that could also be something that you might want to think about how to incorporate looking at that, because so many of these plans are very mature with negative non-investment cash flow, that also has to drive their asset allocations. Those are my only comments.
Yes, and yeah, and part of that too with the non-investment cash flow, that's the next step for the systems with higher liquidity. We will be looking into that aspect of provide additional analysis.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I hope that all the plans and the board appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I personally really appreciate the transparency and the visibility to some of the, you know, real sophisticated measurement tools that are used, you know, across the investment landscape. So thank you, Mr. Munner. Very, very, very good work. And that concludes the report of the investment committee.
Wonderful, thank you both. I think at this time we'll move on to agenda item number 9, which is the 2026 customer service survey. And I'll now ask Jen Kirshner, communications specialist, to present item 9 to the board.
Good afternoon, members. My name is Jen Kirstner, and I'm the PRB's Communications Specialist. I'm here to talk on item 9, the results of the 2026 Customer Service Survey. The full report can be found in your packet after these slides or on the agency website if you'd like to see detailed breakdowns of the process, questions, and results. This presentation will be a broad overview of the results and feedback. So first, we have some background on the survey. PRB staff conducts this survey every even-numbered year as required by the strategic planning process. This year, the survey was open for 4 weeks during March and April. Staff sent an email to 554 contacts when the survey was opened and sent a reminder about halfway through the survey period. Staff also included the link to the survey on the PRB LinkedIn page, the agency's website, and our weekly newsletter. We received 44 responses, which is on par with previous surveys, though we had a slightly lower response rate due to a larger contact list than previous surveys. Most of these additional contacts for this survey were new participants in PRB online courses. So the survey had 15 questions on topics including agency staff, transparency, the agency's main website, and Telpro assistance. This graph shows the average score for each question. Questions that had an average score of at least 4 are interpreted as stakeholders being satisfied with that particular service. All but 2 of the questions came in above the thick blue line that shows an average score of 4. The 2 that are not came in only a touch below the line at 3.94 and 3.93. This puts them in a range that indicates neutral leaning positive rather than unsatisfied. And I will talk more about those 2 in the next slide. So questions 6 and 12 were the only ones to receive an average score of less than 4. Both had low numbers of responses, 17 and 15 respectively, and were thus more affected by their single unsatisfied responses. This aligns with previous surveys. Question 6 relates to satisfaction with agency facilities. In-office visits are rare because most questions are asked through email or by phone. This question usually has fewer responses on surveys, but it is a required question for customer service surveys. The single unsatisfied feedback was about their experience of remotely watching meetings, which I will talk more about in the next slide. Question 12 relates to the agency's complaint handling process. Staff does not often receive complaints about the agency or systems. During the biennium covered by the survey, staff only received 2 complaints, which is a typical amount. In the case of this survey, the single unsatisfied response did not provide further details, so we cannot provide direct assistance to them. So for the next couple of slides, I'm going to touch on specific feedback staff received through the survey and what we have done and or plan to do to address it. The complete list of feedback by question is in the full report. As mentioned on the previous slide, someone commented that viewing board meetings is difficult. The respondent did not specify the location of the meetings, but we have previously heard of audio and visual difficulties during meetings in rooms outside the Capitol, so that is how we're interpreting this. Recently, we made some adjustments, such as moving the microphone and speaker, and we recently purchased new equipment that we are using today that we hope will result in a better experience for those watching remotely. Staff also heard from a couple of respondents that they wanted more communication on upcoming trainings. We are always looking for ways to increase and improve our communication with stakeholders, so this feedback was helpful. Since the survey, we have started sharing more information on social media and in our weekly newsletter about upcoming conferences and trainings, especially when a PRB member will be presenting there. As a reminder, anyone can sign up for the weekly newsletter on the PRB's website or follow us on LinkedIn. We had one respondent comment that the PRB 2000 forms are difficult to fill out. As you heard from Jasmine earlier, we have aimed to address this issue in the recent portal updates. While we certainly invite feedback on the new portal capabilities, We are expecting that this new dashboard will be more user-friendly than the PDF. The other main feedback category I'll discuss today is the request for more MET courses. This is also something that we have received feedback on in previous surveys. We have recently focused our MET resources on improving MET compliance and submissions. Now that the brunt of that work is over, staff will be able to turn our attention to adding new online courses, as well as updating existing ones to be more user-friendly. We have already begun some brainstorming and will continue. And this is in addition to also what Jasmine mentioned about expanding existing relationships with training providers and looking into adding some more. So obviously not all of the comments staff received were suggestions on how to improve agency services. On this slide, I have compiled some of the positive feedback we received, and most of it is related to interactions with staff as a whole. We also had several respondents praise individual staff and agency leadership for their work. I also want to draw attention to the website comment in particular, because over the past years, and especially this year, staff has been focused on improving the accessibility and user experience of its website, both due to previous feedback and new or existing legislation and federal rules. Much of the recent work was done after the survey was open, so we hope to see continued positive responses for that service. So for the main takeaways from the survey results, as noted on the graph earlier in this presentation, most questions received satisfied responses. The two that had slightly lower average score had less than half of the possible responses and were more greatly impacted by the single unsatisfied responses they received. That said, we still reference all feedback when considering how to improve our services. One important part of the customer service survey is to capture the agency's performance measure related to satisfaction with educational services. In this survey, there was an 85.71% satisfaction rate with educational services, which is up from the previous survey. And building off that satisfaction, the final question of the survey asked for respondents' overall satisfaction with the agency. The 88.37% satisfaction rate is among the highest across this survey's questions and is also up from previous surveys. Staff will be using all the feedback to guide us in the upcoming biennium, and we thank everyone who took the time to fill out the survey. That is all I have for this presentation, but I'm open to any questions you might have.
Thank you. I just want to say, well done by the staff. I mean, I think we as a board are always, happy with the information that we receive and proud to serve on the board and grateful for staff and everything that you guys do. And I think that this survey just shows that a lot of our constituents feel the same way. So job well done. Anything else from other board members? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to item number 10, which is our executive director report. So I'll turn it over to you for that, so I'll ask for that.
I have a presentation to do on that. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, members. Item 10 has several components, and there are 2 items for which we will ask for. Next slide, please. Item 10A is an update item for the board that we did complete the 2027 through 2031 PRB strategic plan, which was due by statute by June 1st, so we did complete it in advance of the deadline. And I have included a link to the strategic plan on this slide. The strategic plan does include several required components, and it really is a team effort to get that report put together. One of the key items is our mission goals and action plans. These are not really new, but they are more of a reflection of the priorities that the board already established, as well as ongoing projects we've already been working on and will continue to work on into the future, such as our IT enhancement projects. Other elements include the customer service survey, which Ms. Spurgeon already provided an overview on today, as well as others. Next slide. Item 10B is the 2028-2029 LAR, or the legislative appropriations request. This is our opportunity to formally make funding requests that serve as an input into the legislature's budget process for next session. That process will set our budget for the following biennium, or starting in September 2027. We just received instructions from the legislative budget board last week, I believe. Our LAR is due August 7th, so it's a pretty quick turnaround, so that means we've got a little over 2 weeks. And we are actively working on this project, which is a major project for, who's our director of business operations, so he's gonna be quite busy in the next couple of weeks. One of the key differences between the LAR this time around, in comparison with the previous two, is that we are required to propose a schedule of 3% cuts to the agency base funding. By base funding, I mean our current budget. Ultimately, what happens with our budget will be decided through the legislative process, and as usual, we can of course request exceptional items, which are funding requests beyond our base. In this case, we can ask to get back the amount being cut from our base, and we can make any other requests that we see need for. Staff has been working with the chair, and I believe we'll be including a small request for performance-based salary increases. We don't have a need for new IT funding at this time, because we are still working on the IT enhancements projects that were funded last session. So this is an item we do need board action on. Basically, it's direction from the board to finalize the LAR by working with the chair and vice chairs. I'll turn it back over to the chair for that motion.
Any questions from the board? Okay, at this time, I'll entertain a motion to direct staff to work with the chair and vice chair to finalize and submit 2028-2029 legislative appropriations requests.
So moved.
Second.
A motion has been made by Mr. Zook, seconded by Mrs. Dush. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. The ayes have it and the motion's passed. Mr. Brenner, please continue.
Okay, yeah, I'm clear. Item 10C is an update on the PRB efficiency audit conducted by the state auditor's office that wrapped up in April. We've already communicated the results of this audit to the board, but I did want to touch on our progress in implementing some of the recommendations. For the first recommendation to improve our property management and dispose of excess property, we've made quite a bit of progress on this front. Our administrative coordinator, Jesse McLaughlin, has been a point person on this, and so far we've disposed of 110 items, including 3 dozen tablets and computers, 22 filing cabinets, which has freed up a lot of space. On the second item, we are pursuing automation opportunities through our ongoing IT enhancements projects. You heard about one of those earlier where Ms. Loomis provided an overview of the new MET module. On the third item, to evaluate efficiency of the report review process, we're working on that through the IT enhancements projects currently underway. We're also piloting an AI tool to help us review reports more quickly. And that's going well so far, but we definitely need more testing and need to think through how we'll use tools like that in the future as part of our routine procedures. Next slide, please. Item 10B is an update on our participation in various industry conferences, including recent past and future. Mr. Fee, our chief actuary, presented at the recent Experts Annual Conference in Galveston, focusing on actuarial assumptions and experience topics. At the Call for Peer Review in May, another educational conference that's directed at the Call for Systems of Local Firefighter plans. Ms. Ehrenstein presented on the current FSRP rule revisions and statutory proposals the board is currently considering, both to educate the group, but also to get the word out that we want to feedback on those proposals. Next up will be the annual Suffolk Conference in October, that will be in Harlingen. We will have Mr. Fee moderate the actuarial panel as usual for the 4th year in a row. And that panel will focus on timely actuarial topics with a panel of actuaries that work with intelligent systems. And also Robert Munter will be making an educational presentation on investment topics. I like to highlight these items because while we have had a lot of stakeholder requests to create more MET continuing education for our website, we're also consistently out there at these conferences doing in-person content as well, and we will continue to strive to provide education in both ways. Next slide. And then lastly, items 10 and F are related to the agency operating budget. First is an updated year-to-date operating budget for this fiscal year as of the end of June 2026, which is this routine item we have in the packet. just informational. The second item is our proposed fiscal year 27 operating budget. For this item, we have a motion for the board to consider approving the fiscal year 27 operating budget.
Any questions from the board? Hearing none at this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve the fiscal year 2027 operating budget as presented.
So moved.
Budget.
Second.
Have a motion made by Mr. Harper, seconded by Ms. Stutch to approve the budget as presented. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. The ayes have it, the fiscal year 2027 operating budget is approved. Next action for agenda item number 11, which is future meetings, agenda items, dates, locations, and other arrangements. Now's the time if board members have any suggested agenda items for a future board member, future board meeting or committee meeting, to bring them up for staff. Okay, hearing none, we'll go on to the calendar. The next pension review board meeting will take place at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, September 30, in the William P. Clements Building, room 402. The investment committee will meet on the same day, September 30, 2026 at 2 p.m. in the same location. The PRV website will be updated with information on meeting locations if additional board or committee meetings are scheduled. There being no further business of the board and no objection, I move to adjourn the meeting. And the meeting is adjourned.